The year was 1867, and the Arizona Territory breathed dust, danger, and silence. Jack Carver had come here for the silence. After the war, after the screams of dying men and the thundering hooves of retreat, after the blood on the Shenandoah grass that never washed from his hands, he wanted no more noise. He wanted the mountains, the wind through mesquite, the crack of an axe on seasoned oak. He wanted a cabin's walls between him and the world. He built that cabin with his own back. No company, no partner. Just sweat, scars, and a mule that had died before the roof was finished. He buried the mule with his rifle leaning on his shoulder, muttering words that weren't prayers because he'd stopped praying years ago. Now he worked a small herd of cattle, traded hides when he needed coin, and avoided both white settlers and Apache camps alike. Neutral, he called himself. Safer that way. But the frontier had a way of dragging men back into storms they thought they'd left. That night the storm was real. The rain came in sheets, heavy enough to bend the mesquite branches low and turn the ground into sucking mud. The cabin walls groaned with every gust. Jack sat inside, lamp low, cleaning his Colt Navy revolver on the table. He wasn't expecting company. He never did. Then came the scratching. At first it was faint, almost drowned by the storm. A drag against the door. Jack's hand froze. His revolver, still half disassembled, lay before him. Another scratch. Slow, deliberate. Not wind. Not animal. He stood, every joint stiff from years in the saddle, and reached for the shotgun, propped by the door. "Who's there?" he called, voice rough as gravel. No answer. Only the sound again, softer this time. He pulled the door open. The wind slammed it wide, rain lashing inside. And there she was, a girl, barefoot, Apache by the braids and the copper skin. She couldn't have been more than 12, though tall for her age. Her clothes were soaked, clinging to her bones. Mud streaked her legs. Her eyes, black, steady, held his like she was measuring his soul. She didn't speak, didn't move, only lifted one hand. In it she held a single feather, long, gray, and sharp as a blade's edge in the lamplight. She laid it on the threshold, then turned, vanishing into the dark and the roar of rain. Jack stood frozen, thunder rolling overhead. The feather lay at his boots. Hawk feather by the look, or eagle. He couldn't tell in the dim light. But he knew one thing, it wasn't a trinket. He'd seen feathers placed on graves before. He'd seen them tied in warriors' hair before battle. It meant something, always something. He closed the door, shotgun still in hand, staring at the thing on the floor. He could leave it there, let it rot in the mud. That would be the smart man's choice. A man with sense would forget the girl, the feather, the whole damn thing. But sleep never came easy for Jack. And that night, it didn't come at all. By dawn the storm had blown east, leaving the land raw and glittering. Jack saddled his bay gelding, a beast as stubborn as he was, and rode down toward the river. He told himself he only wanted to see, to know if she drowned in the flood or made it back to her people. That was all, but the land told a different story. He found tracks in the soft earth near the riverbank, bare feet, small, leading into reeds torn and broken, splashed with red, blood. The trail bent toward the shallows, where the current still churned fast and brown from last night's rain. He found broken branches there, footprints of men's boots. 2 sets, heavy. The girl's tracks ran beside them, scattered, frantic. Jack's jaw tightened. He should ride back. This wasn't his fight. He had no place in Apache matters, no quarrel with settlers either. But he saw it clear in the mud, one set of tracks dragging. A small heel sliding, resisting. He spat into the dirt, cursed himself, and followed. The trail cut downstream, weaving through brush. Twice he lost it, twice he found it again. Then he heard them, voices rough carried on the wind. Men laughing, the sharp whinny of a horse. Jack dismounted, tied his gelding in the shade, and crept low through the mesquite. They were by the far bank, 2 men with rifles slung careless, arguing over the girl. She was crouched between them, wrists tied, mud streaked up her arms. She didn't make a sound. Her eyes burned at them, not broken, not pleading. Silent. One of the men, a big fellow with a red beard, grabbed her chin. "Apache stock fetches high," he said. Not as much as a boy, but someone will pay. Or she'll serve fine in Prescott. The other spat. She'll slit your throat first chance she gets. Not if she's broke right. Jack's hand tightened on the shotgun. He could walk away. Leave her to fate. She wasn't his blood. Not his kin. But that feather burned in his pocket like a coal. He stepped out from cover. Let her go. The two men jerked around. Redbeard cursed, hand flying for his pistol. Jack fired. The roar of the shotgun cracked across the water, buckshot tearing through Redbeard's chest. He spun and fell, eyes wide. Before his body hit the mud, the second man scrambled for his rifle. Jack dove behind a log, levered his Colt Navy into his hand, cocking it smooth. Bullets split bark, spraying splinters across his cheek. Jack returned fire. 2 shots, fast. The man screamed, staggered, and dropped in the reeds, clutching his stomach. Silence followed, just the river's rush and the girl's steady breathing. Jack lowered the Colt. His heart hammered, but his hands were steady. He holstered the gun, crossed to the girl, and cut her bonds with his knife. She didn't flinch, didn't thank him, just stood, rubbing her wrists, staring straight into his face like she was reading words he hadn't spoken. "You're free," he muttered. She didn't answer. He turned, whistled for his gelding. She followed him, silent as shadow. By the time they reached the cabin, the sun was falling, staining the horizon red. Jack lit the lamp, laid his guns on the table, and poured coffee into a tin cup. The girl sat across from him, still wordless, the feather clutched tight in her hands now. He studied her in the lamplight. Young, but her gaze held weight. Not fear, not even gratitude, something else, like she'd chosen him, and now she was waiting for him to understand why. Jack rubbed his temples. "You can't stay here. Folks ask questions. They'll think I stole you or worse. Your people." She set the feather down between them. Carefully, deliberately. Jack stared at it. The lamp flame trembled, throwing shadows long across the cabin walls. He leaned back, sighed deep. He'd lived through wars, raids, famine. He'd buried men and beasts alike. But nothing in all that had felt like this, like standing on the edge of something vast and unknown, with a feather as his only map. Outside, coyotes yipped in the hills. The girl didn't move, didn't speak, just waited. And Jack Carver, for the first time in years, felt the ground shift beneath his boots. He blew out the lamp. The feather stayed on the table, gleaming faint in the moonlight. By morning, he knew he was in trouble. The morning came sharp and clear, the kind of morning that made the desert seem endless. Jack Carver sat on his porch with the feather between his fingers, rolling it slowly, as though the answer to its meaning might shake loose. The girl sat cross-legged in the dirt a few feet away, watching him without a word, her expression unreadable. She hadn't tried to run. She hadn't tried to speak. She simply stayed, like a shadow that refused to be shaken. By mid-morning, Jack saddled his gelding. He decided she needed to be left at the trading post. If she had people nearby, word would travel and someone would fetch her. That was the cleanest way, safer than keeping her, safer than being accused of kidnapping an Apache child. "You're coming with me," he said, his voice low. He wasn't sure if she understood English, but her eyes told him she understood more than she let on. She climbed up behind the saddle, light as a bundle of sticks, clutching the feather tight in her hand. The trail to the trading post wound across dry flats and mesquite thickets. The land still carried the scent of the storm, wet sage and damp earth. Jack rode stiff, senses on edge, every glance of the girl like a silent judgment. He told himself again this wasn't his fight. He was just delivering her. The post came into view near noon. A squat adobe building ringed with wagons, men lounging outside with rifles propped against their knees. Jack felt the weight of every eye as he dismounted. He led the girl by the wrist inside, the air thick with pipe smoke and sweat. The trader, a wiry man named Haskins, looked up from behind the counter. "Carver," he drawled, "didn't expect to see you till spring." His eyes flipped to the girl. "What's this?" "Found her wandering," Jack said. "Figured she might belong to somebody." The room went quiet. Men at the tables leaned forward, their gazes sharp. Haskins wiped his hands on his vest, his grin turning sly. That's so? Apache girl all the way out here? That's a prize carver. Could fetch a pretty penny in Prescott. She's not for sale, Jack said flatly. Murmurs rippled. One man spat tobacco juice into the corner. Another scratched his beard, eyes gleaming with interest. Haskins leaned forward. Then, what do you plan to do with her? Folks won't take kindly to you harboring redskins. Especially not after, well, you know. Jack's jaw tightened. He did know. Raids had cut through the territory last year, settlers killed, wagons burned. Every white man at the post carried that wound like fresh scar tissue, and now here he was, standing with an Apache child at his side. She's not staying with me, Jack said. I'll leave her here. You can see to it she finds her people. Haskins smirked. And if her people don't come, what then? Jack didn't answer. He turned to leave, but the bounty hunter by the door stepped into his path. Broad-shouldered, scar across his chin, revolver low on his hip. His voice carried weight, the kind that came from killing more men than he could count. I know her, the hunter said. She's kin to a chief. Silent Hawk's blood, they say, means trouble if she's here. Her people will come for her. And when they do, they'll come for whoever's kept her. Jack held his gaze cold and steady. Then I reckon they'll come for you, too, if you're fool enough to touch her. The hunter's lips curled, but he stepped aside. Jack led the girl out, the mutters behind him burning like coals in his ears. Back on the trail, the girl walked beside the horse now, refusing to ride. Jack studied her from the saddle. She hadn't spoken once, but her silence was louder than any words. When they reached the cabin again, dusk was falling. Smoke rose in thin lines from distant camps. The air felt heavy, charged. That night, he slept with the rifle across his knees. He woke to fire. Flames licked at the corral, smoke billowing. Cattle bawled in panic. Shots cracked through the night. Jack rolled, firing blind through the window. Shadows moved in the dark, quick and silent. Raiders, he thought at first, but these weren't Apaches. He caught sight of faces in the firelight, settlers, rough men from the post. The girl crouched by the hearth, calm, eyes reflecting the flames. Jack shoved the rifle into her hands. Stay down, he barked, then dove outside. Bullets whined past his head. He returned fire, driving two men back into the brush. Another charged from the side with a torch raised, but Jack met him with a pistol shot to the chest. The torch dropped, sputtering in the dirt. The fight was quick, brutal, then gone. The attackers fled into the night, leaving two bodies in the mud. The corral smoldered, one fence blackened but holding. Jack stood heaving, sweat cutting lines through soot on his face. Inside, the girl hadn't moved. She placed the rifle gently on the table, then set the feather beside it. Her eyes held his, unwavering. Jack's stomach sank. She wasn't just lost. She wasn't just some runaway. She was marked, chosen. Whatever she carried, it had found its way to him now, whether he wanted it or not. The next morning, he made his choice. He packed a bedroll, dried meat, a flask of water. He saddled the gelding again. We're leaving, he said. The girl climbed up behind him without hesitation. They rode into the mountains, where red rock cliffs rose jagged against the sky, and the pines whispered secrets in the wind. Jack knew the trails well. He knew where a man could hide, where a man could vanish. But the girl seemed to know them better. She guided him with nothing more than her gaze, a tilt of her chin, as though she'd walked these paths all her life. Nights were cold. Jack built small fires, the smoke thin enough not to carry. They ate in silence, the crackle of flames their only company. One night, as frost silvered the grass, Jack spoke at last. I had a daughter once, about your age. His voice was low, brittle. She died back east, fever took her. Couldn't save her. Couldn't even bury her proper. That's why I came here. To forget. The girl listened, eyes softening for the first time. She reached into her dress, pulled the feather, and laid it across his knee. He stared at it in the firelight, throat tight. He didn't know what she meant by it, but it felt like a bond, a weight laid gently on his shoulders. On the fifth day, they found themselves hemmed in. Jack sensed at first the stillness in the air, the absence of birdsong. Then came the riders, silent, painted in ochre and black, sliding out from the trees like spirits. Apache scouts, bows drawn, rifles ready. Jack raised his hand slow. The girl dismounted, walking forward without fear. She held the feather high, then pressed it to her chest. The warriors parted, letting her through. One of them nodded to her, a subtle bow. Jack's heart sank. He understood then. She hadn't been lost. She hadn't been running. She'd been leading him, straight into their hands. The scouts closed in around him, rifles glinting in the last light of day. The girl turned back, once, her eyes locking on his. For the first time, a smile flickered on her lips, and Jack Carver, surrounded in the deep woods with no escape, knew his life was no longer his own. The warriors didn't speak at first. They moved around Jack with the silence of wolves, weapons raised but steady. The girl stood among them, small yet commanding, her hand still wrapped tight around the feather. She looked back at Jack once, then gestured toward the trail. The meaning was plain. He would come with them. He had no choice. Jack walked, his rifle left slung across his back, his revolver heavy at his hip, but useless against so many. The scouts led him through narrow switchbacks, across streams, and over ridges where the air thinned and the pines grew dense. The sun dipped lower, bleeding red through the branches. Jack's legs burned with fatigue, but none of the warriors slowed. They moved with purpose, their faces stern, their eyes sharp on him as though every breath he drew was being measured. At last they reached a hollow where smoke rose between the trees. The Apache camp stretched before him, lodges of hide and brush, fires crackling, children darting between them. Women ground maize on flat stones, their hands never pausing, even as their eyes turned to the stranger brought among them. The air was thick with the scent of roasted meat and burning cedar. Jack felt the weight of every gaze. The scouts halted before a lodge larger than the rest. From within stepped a man broad-shouldered, his hair streaked with gray, his chest painted with black lines that told of battles past. His eyes burned like coals under heavy brows. Silent Hawk, Jack thought at once. He had heard the name in whispers across the frontier. Chief, war leader, a man both feared and respected. The girl ran to him, clutching his arm. He laid a hand on her head, then looked to Jack. For a long moment, silence held the camp. Then the chief spoke, his English rough but strong. "You carried my daughter. You kept her safe." Jack blinked. Daughter. The word struck like a hammer. The girl stood straighter, her gaze proud now, no longer the silent waif he'd found in the storm. She had been his test, his measure. "I didn't know," Jack said, his throat dry. "I only—" Silent Hawk raised a hand. "You fought for her. You did not sell her. You did not hand her to men who would use her. That is enough." The chief turned, speaking rapid words in Apache. A murmur rippled through the camp. Some eyes softened, others hardened. Jack caught fragments of mood. Some saw him as ally, others as threat. He was led to a fire at the camp center. Meat was placed before him, water in a gourd. He ate with the caution of a man who knew he was under trial. The girl sat close, her silence unbroken but her presence steady like a bond forged in fire. Night settled. Drums beat slow in the distance, a heartbeat rolling through the woods. Men gathered around the fire, rifles stacked close. Silent Hawk spoke again, his voice carrying. "White men have taken much. Land, water. Our dead. We fight. Always we fight. Yet you," his eyes pierced Jack, "you fought beside my daughter, though she was nothing to you. Why?" Jack stared into the flames. The truth burned inside him, sharp and raw. "Because I had a daughter once," he said. His voice was low, but every man heard. "She died. I couldn't save her. Maybe I saw her in this girl. Maybe I wanted one chance to do it different." The chief studied him long. Then he nodded, slow. "The spirits put her on your path. They see you still have strength." Before Jack could answer, a cry split the night. A scout rushed in, speaking quick, urgent words. The men stiffened, faces grim. Silent Hawk turned to Jack. "Your people come. Guns. Many men. They want my daughter. They will kill for her. Jack's stomach dropped. He saw the faces in his mind, the bounty hunter Haskins, the rough men from the post. They had followed, hungering for a prize that wasn't theirs. Then they'll find more than they bargained for, Jack said. The camp erupted into motion. Warriors painted their faces, strung bows, loaded rifles. Women gathered children, vanishing into the shadows of the pines. The girl stood tall, her chin lifted. She pressed the feather into Jack's hand. For the first time, he felt its weight, not as mystery but as command. The settlers came at dawn. Their rifles glinted as they pushed through the trees, voices coarse with anger. At their head rode the bounty hunter, his scar catching the light. He called out, voice booming, "Send her out, Silent Hawk. She belongs to us now. And that rancher, too. He's a traitor." The chief stepped forward, flanked by his warriors. Jack stood at his side, the feather tied to his rifle barrel. The air quivered with tension. Every man knew blood was about to spill. "Turn back," Silent Hawk said. His voice was iron. The bounty hunter sneered. "You're outnumbered. We'll take what's ours." Silence fell. Then the crack of a rifle split it. The battle erupted in thunder. Gunfire tore the air, smoke rising thick. Warriors moved swift, striking from the trees. Settlers fired wild, their shouts mixing with the war cries that shook the forest. Jack's rifle bucked in his hands, each shot dropping a man who pressed too close. He moved with grim precision, years of war sharpening his aim. Bullets whined past his ears. One struck his shoulder, spinning him to the ground. Pain flared hot, but he rolled, reloaded, fired again. The bounty hunter charged through the chaos, pistol raised. Jack met him head-on. They clashed in the mud, fists in fury, the gun knocked wide. The hunter's blade flashed, slicing Jack's arm. Jack grunted, drove his fist into the man's jaw, then slammed his head into the earth. The hunter roared, scrambling, but Jack's revolver was faster. One shot ended it. The fight raged until the settlers broke, fear driving them back into the trees. The ground lay littered with bodies, smoke curling like ghosts. The Apache stood tall, their cries of victory echoing. Jack staggered, blood soaking his sleeve. Silent Hawk approached, eyes fierce but proud. "You stood with us," he said. "You are not alone now. You have brothers." The words struck deeper than the bullet had. Jack nodded, breath ragged. He felt the truth of it settle in his bones. The girl stepped forward. For the first time, her lips parted. Her voice was soft, carrying more weight than all the thunder of the battle. "Father," she said. Jack froze. The word cut him open and mended him in the same breath. His eyes stung, though he hadn't wept in years. He placed a hand on her shoulder, steady despite the shaking in his chest. The camp gathered close, warriors lowering their rifles, women emerging with children safe. The fire burned high, casting long shadows. Jack stood among them, no longer an outcast, no longer a man alone. As the sun dipped low, the chief raised his hand. "This man is our brother," he declared. His blood spilled with ours. His heart beats with ours. The camp answered with a cry that rolled like thunder through the trees. Jack felt it wash over him, a tide that swept away years of silence and bitterness. He wasn't just surviving now. He was living. That night, as stars wheeled across the black sky, Jack sat by the fire with the girl at his side. The feather lay across his knee, no longer strange, no longer burden. It was bond, promise, family. He thought of his lost daughter, of graves left far behind. He thought of the storm, the scratching at his door, the silent girl who had changed everything with a single gift. And he thought of what it meant to belong after so long without it. The frontier was cruel, harsh, and endless. But in that moment, Jack Carver felt its beauty. The wilderness didn't just take. Sometimes, against all odds, it gave. The moon rode high over the broken ridges, casting long shadows across the valley floor. Every rock, every scrub bush seemed alive in the silver light, crouched and waiting. Caleb kept low in the saddle, his hand never straying far from the worn grip of his colt. Behind him, The faint shuffle of horses and the muted breath of riders told him he was not alone. The Apache warriors moved like ghosts, silent and sure, their presence less seen than felt. They trusted him to lead. He wasn't certain he deserved it, but tonight he had no choice but to prove he did. The girl's feather, the one that had started it all, still rested in his saddlebag, bound in a strip of rawhide. He had thought of it often, what it meant, why it was placed at his door. Now he understood. It had been a call, a summons into a war he never asked for, but could no longer refuse. From the ridge ahead, the glow of campfires flickered against the night. Shadows moved between them. Armed men, watchful and restless. Caldwell's mercenaries. Guns for hire, hardened by greed. They had been promised the land, promised the girl, promised blood if it came to that. Caleb could see their outline against the flames. Dozens of them, maybe more. Too many for a straight fight. He drew a slow breath, felt the burn of dust in his throat. "They're waiting," he whispered, his voice barely carried, but the riders behind him heard. Gray Fox edged his mount closer, his eyes dark and steady. "Then we do not wait. We strike as one. You said you would ride with us, Caleb Mason. Tonight we learn if your word is iron or if it is wind." Caleb tightened his jaw. "My word holds." There was no time for doubt, no room for hesitation. The men in that camp had hunted the girl, scarred the land, and fired on the village. They had to be stopped. Caleb knew what awaited if they failed. Caldwell would burn everything in his path to claim what he thought was his. The plan was simple, though simplicity did not make it safe. Half the warriors would circle wide, cutting off escape. Caleb, Gray Fox, and a small band would push straight into the camp, sowing confusion, breaking the line before the others struck. If luck rode with them, Caldwell would be forced into the open. If not, well, Caleb had made peace with worse odds before. The horses shifted, hooves grinding softly in the dirt. Caleb raised his hand, gave the signal. In the next instant, the night broke apart. They rode hard, straight from shadow into firelight, the ground thundering beneath them. Shouts tore through the camp, men scrambling for rifles. Caleb fired from the saddle, the Colt bucking in his fist. A man pitched backward into the flames. Another went down clutching his chest. Sparks scattered skyward, and chaos flooded the clearing. Gray Fox let out a fierce cry, his warriors answering in kind. The sound rolled over the camp like thunder, fierce enough to shake even the bravest. Horses crashed through tents, scattering supplies, kicking sparks that caught in canvas and dry brush. Fire spread fast, eating the night. Caldwell's men rallied quick, too quick. These weren't green farmhands, they were killers seasoned by war. A volley of shots cracked from a far side, splinters flying as Caleb ducked low. A bullet kissed his shoulder, hot and sharp, spinning him in the saddle. He bit back a curse, forced himself upright. Pain would have to wait. He saw Caldwell, then, standing tall at the heart of the camp, his long coat snapping in the firelight, a rifle in his hands. His face was cold, carved from stone, eyes locked on Caleb. This wasn't about land anymore. This was personal. "Bring him down." Caldwell roared. Caleb spurred forward, weaving through the melee. Warriors clashed with hired guns, knives flashing, rifles cracking at close range. Smoke choked the air, thick and bitter, mixing with the copper tang of blood. Still Caleb drove toward Caldwell, the world narrowing to that single figure across the flames. A gunman stepped into his path, shotgun raised. Caleb fired first, the blast lifting the man off his feet. He barely slowed. Another lunged with a blade, caught only the heel of Caleb's boot before being trampled under. Then he was there, face to face with the man who had set all of this in motion. Caldwell swung his rifle up. Caleb dove from the saddle, hitting the ground hard. The rifle cracked, the shot whistling past his ear. Dirt filled his mouth, grit grinding between his teeth. He rolled, came up on one knee, Colt steady. The two men circled, firelight painting them in shifting hues of gold and shadow. Around them, the battle raged, but for an instant it felt as if the world had gone quiet. "You should have stayed on your land, Mason," Caldwell spat. "This fight ain't yours." Caleb's voice was low, even. "It is now." Caldwell's eyes flicked toward the girl. She stood near the edge of the fight, guarded by two warriors, her face pale, but unflinching. That small, silent figure had drawn Caleb into this storm, had changed the course of everything. He saw the greed in Caldwell's stare, the hunger to break what could not be bought. And Caleb knew what he had to do. Caldwell lunged, swinging the rifle like a club. Caleb ducked, drove his shoulder into the man's chest, sent them both sprawling into the dirt. They grappled, fists flying, each strike fueled by fury and something deeper. Caldwell by hunger for power, Caleb by the fierce need to protect what was not his but had become his burden to bear. The fight was brutal, close, no room for anything but raw will. Caldwell's fist split Caleb's lip. Caleb's elbow cracked against Caldwell's jaw. Blood slicked their hands, sweat stung their eyes, yet neither let go. At last, Caldwell drew a knife from his belt, the blade flashing. He drove it down hard. Caleb caught his wrist, muscles straining, the knife inching closer, the point grazing his throat. He felt the edge bite shallow, hot blood running. His strength wavered. Caldwell pressed harder, a snarl tearing from his throat. Then another sound cut through. A sharp cry. The girl. She had broken free, darted close despite the chaos, her small hands clutching something. A rock. She swung with all her might, striking Caldwell across the temple. He staggered, dazed. It was all the opening Caleb needed. With a surge born of desperation, he twisted, tore the knife free, and drove it into the dirt beside Caldwell's head. His Colt was in his other hand, barrel pressed firm against a man's chest. The camp fell still. Warriors stood in a loose circle, their enemies either dead or broken. Flames roared high, lighting the night like day. All eyes turned to Caleb. Caldwell's breath came in ragged bursts, his eyes still burning with hatred. "Do it," he hissed. "Finish it." Caleb's finger tightened on the trigger. Every part of him screamed to end it, to wipe this man from the earth. But something inside held him back. He saw the girl watching, her eyes wide and unblinking. He saw Gray Fox, silent, waiting to see what kind of man stood before them. Killing Caldwell would be easy. Living with it might not. Caleb lowered the gun. "You'll answer for what you've done," he said, voice steady. "But not like this." The warriors moved in, binding Caldwell's hands, stripping him of weapons. The fight was done. Caleb staggered to his feet, chest heaving, blood running warm down his neck. The girl came to him, her hand light on his arm. No words passed between them, none were needed. She had given him the strength to see it through, as much as any bullet or blade. By dawn, the fires had burned low, leaving the camp a blackened ruin. Caldwell was gone, taken east under guard, his fate sealed by those he had sought to destroy. The mercenaries who survived scattered, their courage spent. The valley was quiet once more. Caleb stood at the ridge, watching the first light touch the land. Behind him, the warriors gathered, the girl at their center. Gray Fox stepped forward, his expression unreadable. "You fought with honor," he said at last. "You bled with us. You chose mercy when you could have chosen death." The feather was well placed. Caleb felt the weight of the words settle deep. He looked to the girl, saw the faintest trace of a smile at the corner of her lips. For the first time in years, he felt something shift inside him. A breaking of old walls, a stirring of belonging. The frontier was still harsh, still unforgiving. But it was not without hope. And as the sun rose over the wide, wild land, Caleb knew this much was true. He had been called into the storm for a reason. Not for land, not for vengeance, but for something greater, something worth standing beside, something worth living for.